Asylum seeker forgets backpack. At station, panic breaks out when they see what's inside. A cold draft rolled through the train station as the morning rush reached its peak. Voices echoed against the tall ceilings, and the clatter of footsteps mixed with the metallic groan of trains pulling in and out. John Miller sat on a wooden bench with a paper cup of coffee, watching the endless stream of travelers. His shoulders ached from the damp air, but he found comfort in simply observing the world move around him. Near the ticket counter, a young man hurried through the crowd. He looked out of place in his oversized jacket and scuffed shoes, clutching a faded backpack tightly to his chest. His dark eyes darted from side to side as if he were lost or late. John noticed him weaving through the people with quick, nervous steps. The young man stopped near a bench not far from where John sat. He placed the backpack down carefully, almost tenderly, and then glanced around once more before heading toward the restrooms at the far end of the station. John frowned and shifted in his seat. The bag sat there, alone, its straps dangling, the fabric frayed at the edges. A mother with 2 children noticed it too. She pulled her kids closer and whispered something hurriedly before leading them away. Others began to cast uneasy glances, their conversations softening into murmurs. The once ordinary hum of the station took on a sharper edge, like the strings of a violin pulled too tight. Minutes passed. The backpack remained untouched. John sipped his coffee, but the taste had turned bitter. He tried to focus on the arrival board flickering above the platforms, but his eyes kept drifting back to the abandoned bag. A businessman in a gray suit slowed as he walked by, staring at it, then shaking his head as he moved on. A pair of teenagers nudged each other, pointing, before deciding to keep their distance. The station felt different now. Every sound, the hiss of brakes, the shuffle of shoes, the metallic slam of a train door, seemed louder, sharper, more threatening. John leaned forward, his heart tapping a steady beat, as if the ordinary had suddenly turned uncertain. The backpack, silent and still, had become the center of the station's attention. The station's rhythm began to falter. What had been the ordinary rush of commuters turned into an unsettled shuffle. People kept glancing toward the bench, then away again, their expressions tight. A woman in a red scarf hurried past, muttering under her breath, while a man with a newspaper stopped walking altogether, standing stiff as he stared at the lonely backpack. Whispers spread quickly. Someone near the vending machines pointed and shook his head. Another voice carried above the low murmur, sharp and anxious, warning others not to get too close. The space around the bench widened as if the bag itself had pushed the crowd back. Travelers slowed their steps, pulled children closer, and moved toward the far wall. The energy of the place had changed. The air felt heavier, pressing down on everyone. John stayed seated, though the coffee cup trembled slightly in his hand. He tried to steady it against his knee, but the nervous motion gave him away. A man standing beside him leaned over just enough to whisper, his words quick and clipped, about how strange the bag looked. John didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the worn fabric, the way one strap curled on the floor like a snake. Then came the crackle of radios. 2 officers entered from the east entrance, their dark uniforms cutting through the uneasy crowd. Their presence drew attention instantly. Heads turned, conversations stopped. The officers scanned the scene, their eyes narrowing when they saw the abandoned backpack. One motioned for people to step back, his arms sweeping firmly through the air. The other spoke into his radio, his voice low but urgent. The murmur turned into something sharper. Words like danger and bomb floated from mouth to mouth. John's chest tightened. The man with the newspaper folded it quickly and tucked it under his arm, walking briskly away. A young mother clutched her toddler and moved toward the doors. Even the teenagers who had joked before now kept their distance, eyes wide. From his bench, John felt the weight of every movement, every whisper. His gaze moved between the officers and the bag, and he realized the entire station was now caught in the same grip of unease. The backpack hadn't moved an inch, but it had changed everything. The officers stood several feet from the bench, their eyes locked on the backpack. One crouched slightly, studying it from the side, while the other kept watch on the restless crowd. The bag sagged against the wood as if it had been there for hours, its shape uneven, the fabric bulging in places. From where John sat, he could swear he saw something thin and dark pressed against the lining. A shiver ran through him. The whispers around him grew louder. Someone near the ticket line said they saw wires. Another voice quickly repeated it, and soon the word wires moved like a spark through dry grass. Each repetition made the crowd flinch a little more, heads turning, eyes narrowing. A man with a baseball cap pressed his phone to his ear, speaking in a rushed tone, while a young woman pulled out hers to record the scene. John shifted forward, elbows on his knees. His coffee cup sat forgotten on the floor. His mind wrestled with what he was seeing and hearing. The rumors swirled in his ears, louder than the echo of announcements over the loudspeaker. The officers waved people farther back, their hands steady, but their faces tense. The circle around the bag widened again. Then movement cut through the heavy silence. From the far end of the station, the young man who had left the bag suddenly appeared. His stride was fast, his eyes wide with alarm. Sweat glistened on his forehead as he looked around frantically. He seemed to search every corner at once until his gaze landed on the bench. Gasps broke out. The crowd shifted as though pushed by a single force. Some took steps back, others leaned forward to see better. The young man hurried toward the bag, but the officers stepped in instantly. One blocked his path, hand outstretched, while the other pressed a firm hand against his chest. The young man froze, his mouth moving quickly, his words too soft to hear over the rush of nervous voices. John's heart thumped against his ribs. For a moment, everything else in the station fell away. The officers, the bag, the crowd, and the frightened young man. All of it seemed suspended, caught in the breathless space between dread and discovery. The young man's voice cracked as he spoke, his words tumbling out too quickly for most to understand. His accent was heavy, his English broken. He pointed desperately at the backpack, his hands shaking so hard they almost blurred in the air. The officers held their ground, one gripping his arm to keep him in place, the other speaking firmly into the radio. The crowd surged closer despite the warnings to stay back. Some shouted angrily, demanding the man be taken away. A woman near the doors pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. Others muttered among themselves, their voices tight and suspicious. The word terrorist hissed from somewhere in the crowd, and it hung in the air like smoke. John stayed on his bench, but his body leaned forward as if pulled by invisible strings. He could see the sweat running down the young man's face, the way his eyes darted from officer to officer, then back to the backpack. His lips formed short phrases, pleading. John caught fragments. Mine. Please. No danger. But they were swallowed up by the rising noise of the crowd. The officers exchanged quick glances, their expressions locked somewhere between caution and doubt. One began to step closer to the bag, his movements slow, deliberate. The crowd hushed instantly, the noise collapsing into a tense silence. Every eye followed the officer as he approached the bench. His boots echoed against the floor, each step a heavy note in the quiet station. The young man struggled against the hand holding him, his voice climbing higher, more frantic. His pleas cracked into near shouts, but the officer kept his distance, circling just enough to peer at the shape of the bag. The onlookers shifted, some pressing against the walls, others clutching their phones like lifelines. John's chest tightened as he watched. The young man's fear looked raw, not staged. His hands shook as though he was the one terrified of what everyone else believed was inside. But no one moved to help him. They all stood frozen, waiting, as the officer hovered near the bag and the young man's cries echoed through the vast hall. The officer crouched slowly beside the bench. The station had gone silent, the kind of silence that makes every breath and cough sound louder than it should. Dozens of eyes followed his hand as it reached for the zipper. The young man's voice broke again, his words tumbling out in a rush. But the officer kept going. The zipper's teeth rasped apart, harsh and metallic in the quiet hall. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the bag gaped open. Inside was a mess of tangled wires, coils of cable, and rolls of black tape. From a distance, it looked exactly like the nightmare everyone feared. Someone cried out, others stepped back quickly, their shoes squealing against the polished floor. The young man jerked forward in panic, his arms still locked in the officer's grip. Then, almost tripping over his words, he shouted what he could. Not bomb, electrician, work. His voice cracked with desperation. but his eyes stayed fixed on the open bag. The officer leaned closer, pulling out a spool of copper wire, then a pair of pliers. Another item followed: screwdrivers, tape, small cutters, all ordinary tools. Slowly the truth spread through the station like a wave. There was no bomb, no danger. Only the belongings of a man trying to hold on to his trade. The young man's chest heaved with relief. He explained as best he could, his voice trembling. His car had broken down, so he took the train. He had gone to the restroom and simply forgot the bag. The crowd stood stunned, caught between shame and relief. The word terrorist, once spoken so boldly, now dissolved into the floor tiles as people avoided one another's eyes. John felt the tension drain from his body, replaced by a heavy guilt. He rose from his bench, his knees stiff, and stepped closer. The young man's eyes lifted toward him, still wet, still fearful. John reached out a hand. Their palms met in a firm, awkward shake, but the gesture cut through the weight in the air. The officers relaxed their stance, the onlookers quietly dispersed, and the ordinary rhythm of the station slowly returned. The bag, now just a bag of wires, sat harmlessly on the bench. For John, the memory of fear lingered, but so did something stronger, the reminder that sometimes suspicion blinds more than it protects.